Welcome to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno. Today, we have a great guest all the way from the CFL office. It's the Director of Football Operations, Eric Noivo. Eric, thanks for joining me today. I know that you are a great guest to accompany on a podcast. And as someone that works in the CFL front office, it's just great to chat Canadian football. There's lots on the horizon right now in the league in the next few weeks.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm excited. Yeah, it is a busy time. We got a regional combine coming up this week and our national combine next week and lots of other events sprinkled in between. So it's a really exciting time for us at the office and for Canadian football fans everywhere.
I know that there is a consistent schedule with the timing of each combine regionally, how they always have the Ontario, then Montreal, and then they have the Western regional. Is it true that they save the best for last when it comes to regional combines as to why they have the Western last?
No, not at all. Actually, the schedule itself is very much dependent on venue availability. We try to pair the Eastern and Ontario ones together to minimize the amount of travel required for scouts. Obviously, they're so busy at this time of year. So the less amount of time they have to spend on the road or in a plane, the better. So we put those two together since they're both out east. It really saves teams out west the hassle of going back and forth a ton of times. And then other than that, it's just based on venue availability. It has worked out that way though in the past few years, but no, I would say the level of talent at each regional kind of varies from year to year. The West might take it one year, Ontario might take it another. It really depends.
The talent this year at the National Combine is going to be super exciting. And I know that there's been chatter about the level maybe has dipped because of there not being an in-person combine for the last 2 years. And now it's starting to pick up because of the 2021 season returning. But on your side of things, that doesn't necessarily affect the work that you're going to do. What have been some of the key tasks that you've had to take care of to prepare for regional combines and as well as the national coming up just in a week and a half here?
Yeah, obviously the lack of a youth sports season in 2020 affected the players in this year's draft class, their ability to get meaningful reps, right? Football, it's not a sport that you can just flick a switch and be game ready overnight, right? It takes hours and hours of practice and repetition. So those players losing out on that opportunity to play was unfortunate. But luckily they were able to play in 2021. Some players have been able to play in some all-star games leading into our combine series. So we're pretty optimistic. We're looking forward to this group. Obviously, it's going to be the biggest CFL combine ever because we will have 40 global players in attendance as well as the national players. So we think the competition is going to be pretty fierce and lots of these kids, the majority of them will have their names called come the draft in May. When it comes to our preparation, really, it hasn't changed year over year. Like, COVID hasn't impacted it in the sense that we're still running a combine. We're happy to be back running one this year, but really it's all logistics and administration. So whether it goes from coordinating the roster, so we get input from all the clubs and we determine our top 60 players that we want to invite. And then from that, we determine the players who won't make it to the national, but will get an opportunity at a regional. So I would say in December, January, and into early February, it's a lot of roster management for us. Coinciding with that is all the venue stuff and the stuff that no one really knows goes into it. So whether it be making the schedules, securing equipment, coaches, assigning apparel, booking hotel rooms, flights, a lot of that stuff. But we're really lucky at the CFL. We have a really strong team. Our football ops team has been through, there's a couple of us who've been through several combine seasons now. I think this is my 7th, and I'm not even the most tenured in terms of combines. And then we have some amazing support from our events team as well, who bring their expertise in that field to help us run 4 combines in a month pretty seamlessly.
It's such a busy time in March. The off season really isn't dormant as much as you'd think, especially when you look at what is on tap for this month, next month, the draft, etc. And football operations can sometimes be the underappreciated side of the game because people always see the on-field product, see the coaches, they see the scouts, but the behind the scenes, the people that organize it and that are the masters of bringing everything to life. When you first started, it wasn't maybe necessarily something that you had on your mind in terms of where you were going to get specifically involved in with the CFL. And it was several years ago, back after you'd finished your playing at Concordia, that you ended up latching onto an internship that paid only about $500 a month to fund and help you survive living in Toronto. But it's been a wild ride now from way back in 2015, hasn't it been?
Yeah, definitely. If you had asked me 10 years ago, I definitely didn't even know that football operations was a professional career stream, right? And even if you ask my parents as early as 3 years ago, they couldn't have told you what football operations is or what it is exactly that I did. It is very unique. And a lot of people don't know what goes into it. I can tell you there's a lot of stuff that we're doing behind the scenes to help a successful season roll out. I would say there's definitely no off season for us because as soon as we close the book on one season, we've already started writing the book on the next season, just because the off season is so short that we don't have enough runway to get everything that we want to get done, not just in terms of like maintenance and stuff that we have to do, but obviously we're always trying to push the envelope, innovate, and find either new programs, new initiatives, new rules, negotiate a new CBA, you name it. We're trying to cram it all into just a few short months ahead of kickoff in June. So it is quite hectic and fast paced, but that's part of what I love about it. I'm working on multiple projects on a given day across the whole gamut of our business. So it really keeps things interesting. No 2 days are alike. And I wake up every day excited to work on bringing the CFL season to the fans. So it's pretty good. And I'm always, it's not lost on me how lucky I am to call professional football my career, because it is, at the end of the day, it's football every day, all day, every day. So it's a pretty cool place to be.
When you first started as an intern, you talked about how even with a league that has a 100-year history plus, you still had an opportunity to do many cool little projects, and there were so many things on the go that you were able to be involved with. You're just talking about how the runway is too short in order to do all the things you want to do in between seasons. And you'd think that with several months of the off season that you can get stuff done, or maybe things aren't that crazy, but things are always moving very quickly, as you mentioned. What were some of your favorite projects and things that you were able to be involved with when you were an intern back in 2015?
Oh, I think the thing that really struck me and surprised me as an intern is when I accepted the internship. I had a bit of a stigma in mind that as an intern, I would be at the photocopier making copies or fetching coffee or dry cleaning or something like that you'd see in the movies. But really, I was like thrown right into the day-to-day operations. Obviously, I wasn't making decisions on how our stance on certain CBA negotiations or anything crazy like that. But I was given access to the databases and essentially like given an opportunity to carve out an opportunity for myself by not excluding me from everything, by including me in conversations and allowing me to really learn about the industry and the business itself. I was able to carve out some opportunities or just bring ideas to the table, which I probably would have never thought was possible. As an intern, specifically, the projects that I enjoyed a lot, I guess I would say a lot of it was data entry, as mundane as that might sound. I learned a lot about our game, just inputting contract details, and seeing how the teams structure their rosters and the decisions and how they're negotiating certain contracts versus others, especially growing up as a football fan and a CFL fan my whole life, seeing how the sausage is made, for lack of a better term, was just really cool. I'll never forget that after my first day coming home and having dozens of former teammates or coaches or friends and family calling me, asking me what it was like. And I was it was just so cool to me, right? It was so new and so different. The office was cool. So it was just overall an amazing experience. And I'm really lucky that I was able to translate that into a full-time career. And I look back at that, and it's been 7 years, which is a long time, but also it feels like just yesterday. So definitely counting my blessings.
From the first days that you strapped on pads at Concordia to being able to work at the CFL full time, I don't think you would have anticipated that a career in professional football would have meant working on the back end of things rather than lighting up quarterbacks or picking them off, depending on where in between you played as a linebacker and defensive end, correct?
Yeah, no, definitely not. And I think it's really I think it's changing slowly, but there's so many amazing ways you can stay involved in the sport. Definitely as a player, you just want to play. In hindsight, obviously hindsight is 2020, but I'm thankful I didn't make it to the CFL. Yes, I attended a regional combine, but I was not athletic enough to play in the league. And even if I had somehow got a training camp invite or made a roster for 1 year, I don't think I end up where I am today. And I don't think I stay this involved in football if my life rolls out that way. So yeah, definitely lucky and fortunate that things worked out that way. Like I said, there's so many ways to stay involved. I thought if I wasn't playing, I would end up coaching like youth teams and whatnot, but you can coach, you can officiate, you can be an administrator. There's so many football programs across the country that are looking for volunteers and for help. And that's really how you start, right? My whole career started as a volunteer at an Eastern Regional Combine. And then I was able to transition into an internship, full-time role, so on and so forth. So it's not about where you start. It's just about starting, really.
You grew up in Montreal and watching the CFL for most of your life. You had the opportunity to see one of two great Alouette dynasties take place during the 2000s. And I'm sure that went into the inspiration to play football. Yeah. Was it the first sport that you fell in love with, or was it also up there with other sports? I mean, as we were discussing a little bit before, the Portuguese background, you'd think that soccer would also be another primary sport you want to be involved with.
Yeah, definitely. So growing up, I would say until like the age of 10 or 12, I have two younger siblings. We all played soccer, and we flirted with basketball, and in high school I played rugby. But I would definitely say football was the first one it wasn't the first one I played, but the first one I truly fell in love with. And I actually didn't fall in love with it until my brother played before me. So he signed up to play. And my dad was like, "Do you want to play too?" And I said no. And then my brother was in spring camp his first season, and I went and watched like one or two practices, and I told my dad, actually, maybe I do want to play. So he was a bit annoyed that he had to go back and register 2 separate times. But it worked out really well, and definitely the sport I love the most, and just makes sense to me the most, if you will. Like my brain really is a football brain. So again, it just makes going to work really, really easy for me, because it's not just a career, it's a passion.
When you played at Concordia, you played during, I think it was it early 2010s, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, I always assume that anything after 2000 is just lumped into 2000s. I forget that there's actual decades after.
Yeah, exactly.
This century.
Yeah, I started at Concordia in January of 2010, and I played up until 2014.
Did you play against Jeremy Rock in the RCQ?
Yeah. He was the starting quarterback at Sherbrooke when I was there.
I know that he holds if I'm not mistaken, I could stand corrected, but I think he holds the record for most passing yards or in U Sports history or something close to that, I think.
Yeah, he was a great player, and definitely it wouldn't surprise me if he's still etched in the record books. There have been some really good quarterbacks that come through since, but he was a huge recruit coming out of CEGEP. I believe he played at Vanier College in Montreal. He was a huge recruit and a great signing for the Sherbrooke program. So it definitely made for some challenging games for us over my tenure at Concordia. But overall, like the Quebec conference at the time was really tough to get out of, and remains to this day. That's why you see the Quebec conference representative, usually in the national, in the Vanier Cup final, if not hoisting it at the end of the year. So it was definitely a great conference to play in because it was so challenging. Like as a defensive lineman, I lined up against in the same season, multiple times a season. I was against Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, who ended up getting drafted in the NFL, as well as the name is escaping me right now, but a young man who played for University of Montreal at tackle and ended up getting signed as an unrestricted free agent to the Carolina Panthers, and then has now since been playing in the CFL. Can't believe I can't remember his name, but so yeah, it was just a great opportunity to play against really, really good players.
Yeah, the Quebec conference is super tough to play in. People always talk about Canada West being also very, very competitive, but there's just some edge that the RSEQ has when it comes to teams that make it to the Vanier. Laval single-handedly owns most of the teams in the Canada West when it comes to the playoffs. Unfortunately for the Canada West, that is, but it's such a different conference to play in as compared to Ontario. Ontario have some amazing teams, but there's also some teams that struggle severely because of that top-heavy power. And has Concordia made it to the Vanier Cup since, or at least maybe like out of the RCQ playoffs? Because I know that Montreal and Laval have owned it for a long time. But
yeah, not in a long time. I believe the last time Concordia made the Vanier was 98. So I was still in elementary school at that time. But yeah, the conferences, it's really interesting. I think it really boils down to the education system, believe it or not. But Quebec has the CEGEP system. So after you go to high school until grade 11, and then instead of having the option to do grade 12, you can go to CEGEP. And CEGEP is essentially your grade 12 year combined with your first year of university in other provinces. So typically Quebec students, or students who are playing or grew up in Quebec and playing at Quebec universities, you've had 1 or 2 years before getting to university where you're exposed to like as close to a professional football program as you've seen in your lifetime. So for example, I went to John Abbott College. I started working out, weight training, speed training. The playbooks get more advanced as opposed to other rookies who started the same year as me at Concordia. I was 1 or 2 years older, and I had already spent years doing that, whereas they were fresh out of grade 12. And some schools that they would be coming from may not have had those other like additional programs that I'm talking about. So I think that's why you see Quebec is such a powerhouse. They're just, the rosters are generally just a little bit older, still within the rules of youth sports. And they're just, their bodies are a bit more mature. They've had more reps on the field. I already mentioned how vital reps is to someone's development. So like for me, I played 3 seasons of CEGEP, did 2.5 years of school. So I got a whole extra season of starting on a team and just being exposed to offenses and defenses compared to other rookies that I entered Concordia with who were from Ontario or out east or wherever it may be. So I think that contributes to it, but every conference has its own like unique flair, right? The athletes coming out of Ontario are pretty explosive, and Canada West is like the linemen out there are so dominant and impressive. So it really is interesting as you go conference to conference, and then even within the conferences regionally, it can be really unique. So definitely a very underrated football ecosystem, that's for sure.
That is a good point. When you grew up, was there a team in Quebec that you liked watching their games in terms of youth sports, or you thought that maybe you would envision playing for them someday? Because there were several schools that had recruited you and you eventually chose Concordia, but what was that landscape like before getting to university?
Yeah, I would say I didn't really have an affinity to any youth sports program before university. When I was growing up, I just always assumed I would go to Concordia because it was in Montreal and my mom had gone there. So as a kid, I just thought, oh, that's what you do. You go to Concordia, you graduate high school, and that's just the process. When I was in my last season of CEGEP, I had a really good coach who kind of opened my eyes to, like, I didn't really know that you could get recruited to go play across the country. And I didn't really know what that entailed. I really wanted to stay home, but I had a really good coach, Robbie McHugh, who helped me kind of explore all my options. I ended up deciding to stay at Concordia, and I'm really happy I did. I had an amazing experience there and met some lifelong friends, and wouldn't have found this job if it weren't for another coach at Concordia. But I can definitely see a parallel universe where I ended up accepting an offer to one of those other schools I took. But up until that point, I didn't really have, my mind was kind of set on Concordia. I wouldn't say I was really rooting for anybody else. I had been to Concordia games. I attended the Concordia football camp as a kid because of my mom's connection to the school, just as a former student. So I would say they definitely had a leg up on everybody else.
It's a great point you made about when you see what university your parents go to and just assume that you're going to follow suit with the same thing. And it also obviously happened to work out very well that you went there and you played football, and all's well that ends well. Yeah. Could you imagine if you would have had went to some of the other schools that had recruited you? I mean, I think one of the other things that's very important when you're a youth sports athlete is just like the experience of playing and studying, because some players are great and get recruited to schools that are really awesome, but maybe they don't get as much playing time. But other times the guys get recruited to schools that maybe are not good academically, but they get lots of playing time. So finding that balance cannot be as easy as it looks.
Oh, definitely not. And part of what made my decision for Concordia easy is I wanted to study psychology. I really enjoyed some, like in CEGEP, to go back to that point about that education system, your CEGEP offers you the opportunity to take entry-level courses in a variety of subjects. So I didn't know what psychology was. And then I took a psychology elective and I really liked it in CEGEP. So then that's how I ended up narrowing my university degree focus to psychology. And I was lucky that Concordia had a really good, and still does have a really good, psychology program. So that made it like there was just too many things. Like Concordia was stacking the deck. But then really, like, it's hard it's hard for athletes sometimes to make decisions based on education, but that's what you should be making your decision on, because football only lasts so long. Even if you're the top 1% of players in Canada or the US, right? Eventually your body just can't play anymore, and you will have to transition to that next phase of your life. So having that education to fall back on is really important. It's hard to see that, especially when you're 18, 19, 20 coming out of school, and all these coaches are recruiting you. They want to make their teams better, obviously. But yet you really have to put a focus or an emphasis on choosing an academic program that will help you succeed beyond the football field.
In the way in which it worked out for you is maybe the word unconventional might be a common theme amongst the way that people get into the sports industry, because like snowflakes, no two paths in sports are alike. I don't think.
Yeah, definitely. I up until I started my internship on May 4th, 2015. And I would say up until March 4th, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. I had completed a certificate, or I was in the midst of completing a certificate on top of a graduate certificate on top of my bachelor's degree. Essentially, I took the certificate just so I could play one more season of football and be with my friends. But then at that point in that winter, I was just taking one course to finish that certificate, and I was applying for jobs, going out on the weekends with my teammates, but really not sure where I would end up. Was honing in on a career in social work. I wanted to work with youth in some capacity, but I still hadn't figured it out by any means until the opportunity to volunteer at the combine, and then being asked to interview and all that really all happened in a span of 2.5 weeks. So yeah, I definitely took a unique pathway. I think now, having worked at the CFL, I've learned a lot. Like, I didn't even know that there were sport management programs before I came to the CFL. So had I known that I could go to Ottawa U or Brock University or any of those schools that offer either undergraduate or graduate sports management programs, who knows, I might have followed that pathway. But nothing really prepares you for a career in football ops specifically, because it is so niche, right? But you still the opportunity to learn those applicable skills that help serve you in your career. So yeah, I definitely took an unconventional pathway. A lot of my coworkers, not just in my department, but in general, have taken unconventional pathways, but ultimately your education is important, but it's also going to come down to a little bit of timing, a little bit of luck, and just being a good person and having someone vouch for you.
Especially when you mentioned sport management, I remember thinking the first time I saw that degree, I was like, wow, like that must be the ticket to the show. And then when you meet people who've gone to sport management and say, well, I still don't know what I want to do, or I'm going to go do something else, or I totally randomly ended up in something else. It just makes you realize, like you said, yeah, education is important for learning how to problem solve, meeting people, etc. But it's not like being a doctor where it's a building block ABC linear path from school to a job.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely not linear. So for some people, it may be, right. Like we have lots of students every year who we hire as interns. The definition of intern has changed since I was one back in the day, but we hire interns from university programs, so they get course credit for completing an internship with us. And some of them will progress, right? They'll do the internship. They've been volunteering everywhere in sports capacity or sports roles in various capacities. And then they're trying to get to that full-time job in sports. And some are just doing the internship because they need it for their degree, but they don't really want to pursue sports. So it's always going to be different, right? Everybody's going to get something different out of it. Ultimately, you get what you put in, right? That goes for anything in life, not just education. But yeah, it's definitely not easy. And even after I got hired full time, I still find myself sometimes wondering, okay, well, I'm here now, and I'm very lucky to be as successful as I have been, and I've got a career that drives me and I'm passionate about. But where do I want to go in 5 years, in 10 years, right? And I think that end goal is always changing for some people, and that's okay too. It's not like you have to know what you're going to end up doing today. And even if you think you know what it is today, if it changes tomorrow, then so be it, right?
What would you say are the 3 main qualities that you look for when you have an intern working underneath you, or that you just notice with interns in general at the CFL?
So different people are going to like, everybody has different strengths and weaknesses, right? I think some of the things that you don't learn in school that really stick out would be just being organized. And I guess you do kind of learn that in school, but we need people who are detail oriented and who are at least going to either take notes or remember what we ask them to do, that type of stuff. So just being organized is a big underrated skill. I would say it's very cliche, but being hardworking, especially as an intern, you're not going to get the most glamorous projects, right? You might be given an Excel sheet and you have to comb through thousands of cells of data to make sure everything is accurate. But just being passionate and hardworking and efficient with that kind of stuff is very important, right? Like I said, at the CFL, we trust our interns with a lot of responsibility. So if I can get to a point after a couple months with an intern where I don't have to hover over them and double check every piece of work, because ultimately it's a reflection of me and our whole team, then that's great, right? But that's not to say everybody is capable of that right away. And then the last thing that I really value in an intern is someone who's always looking for ways to add value. So being a bit of a go-getter or self-starter and just seeing opportunities, like, especially because we give them access to so much, but offering to help, offering to go that extra mile, or offering ideas and solutions, that really stands out to all of us, right? Because that's what really separates someone. There are a lot of people that you could hire that would do a really good job and check all the boxes. But anytime you come across someone who goes above and beyond, it's a really nice added bonus.
And they call them cliches for a reason, because
that's true.
They're important. Like, it sounds like, oh, this seems obvious, or you should know this, it should go without saying, but it still means that you have to do it.
Yeah. And the other one, I know you only asked for 3, but the other thing that's really important to me and our team is just being a good person, right? Like, we work really hard. We work long hours. We work it's like our football operations team is like a second family. So you want to be able to work with someone who you get along with and is just a good person, because otherwise, if you're not, it makes it a lot tougher. You'd be surprised. We've had interns over the years who've tried to get a bit ahead of themselves, or have lied to get ahead, or taken advantage of some of the freedoms we've given them. And that's just not someone we want to work with on an everyday basis, because we can't trust them. So being a good person is really important. And anytime I talk to a group of sport management students, or if I'm talking to a youth football team or whatever, I always make sure to preach about the value of just being a good human.
those are such important things to remember. And being a good
Mm-hmm.
person is one thing that is echoed throughout the whole sports industry. And our program director was actually talking. He gave an example of Rob Black as, I mean, he's a legend from Winnipeg, as we know, and he was seen as one of the first examples in media where people talk about just being a good person and being able to make it far, because oftentimes you hear chattering corners of, oh, well, the only people that make it far are the ones that are jerks or the ones that are full themselves, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore, and especially not in Canada. I can't speak for the United States, but like, just being a good person should be a goal regardless of where
Yeah.
you work or what it is you
Oh,
do.
yeah. Couldn't agree more. But unfortunately, that's just like, it's not the reality. I couldn't agree more though. And then that's why we just gotta keep reminding people of that, and keep preaching it. And it's not hard to be a good person, right? It's just treat other people the way you would want to be treated, and maybe go that extra step once in a while for people, and that'll make all the world of difference. You'd be surprised.
So, as we mentioned before we started recording, Noivo, that last name, it comes from a Portuguese background. So, are both your parents Portuguese, or
Yeah.
one is?
Yeah, no, they're both Portuguese. My mom was actually born there, and then her father, my grandfather, immigrated here, left my mom and my grandmother behind, worked here for 2 years to save enough money to bring them over, and then essentially live the Canadian dream. And then my dad, his parents also immigrated here, but he was born here. And same thing, they started some small businesses back in the 60s, and were able to find sustain a life for themselves, and offer both of my parents opportunities that they didn't have as kids. And then my parents offered my siblings and I like an amazing life growing up. And sometimes we sit around the dinner table having some wine and port, as Portuguese people do, and reminisce. And sometimes I really kick myself realizing how lucky I've been compared to the upbringing that my parents had, and even my grandparents, and going back further than that. It's hard not to be just appreciative of what we, especially given what's going on in the world these days. It's really hard not to just count myself really lucky, and to try to take advantage of all the opportunities I'm given, because not everybody is as lucky, right? So, and that's why I think it's so important to try and be a good person, and give back where you can, because not everybody has the same situation, and lots of people face hardships. So, but yeah, I'm a proud Portuguese boy, as my mom would say, and I love going back to Portugal any chance I get. Obviously, it's very tough with the football season and the off season to get there, but it is an amazing place, and somewhere I'm proud to be from.
Where in Portugal is your family from?
Um, my mom's from Ladia, and my dad's from a small town outside of Peniche, which is they're both like essentially central west coast of Portugal, which is interesting because most Portuguese people I meet are from the Azores or the islands, but you know, both my parents are mainlanders. So definitely, I was out for dinner with a colleague the other night. We had our CFL medical meetings, and we just so happened to be at a Portuguese restaurant. So I had some fun being the expert, explaining the menu to everybody, and reminiscing on some memories of the different types of food on the menu.
How have you been to Portugal before?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to go just recently. My fiance and I went right before COVID, actually. And then growing up, we would go every couple of years. My parents now, they do have a place over in Portugal. So they try to go, especially now that they're both retired, they try to go every year for a couple months at a time. So I'll try and get back as often as I can. As I get older, I find it's getting harder and harder. There's just so many places I would love to see in the world, and so little time to see it in. So.
Did your parents raise you speaking Portuguese, or not so much?
Yeah, my parents are both fluent. And I'm told that until I was about 2 or 3, I only spoke Portuguese, and then they sent me off to preschool or daycare, one or the other, and I came back crying because I couldn't communicate with any of the other kids. So then they realized, okay, maybe we should switch to English, and then not that I lost my Portuguese, but I wouldn't say I'm as fluent as I'd like to be. I understand it very well. And I have kind of like basic language skills, but would definitely like to be better. And I've downloaded the apps. I'm working on Duolingo, trying to get better at it. But my parents are full on bilingual or trilingual actually with French. So as a kid, it used to embarrass me. We'd go shopping or like we go shopping for like a new stove or something like that, and the sales rep would be asking them questions and they'd just be talking to each other in Portuguese, trying to figure out what they wanted to do. So it's a skill I wish I had now myself. But
are you sure? I really need to check my living area for any cameras or bugging devices, because I'm sure that you were just copying my exact life story with everything you just said. I'm dead serious.
Yeah,
my older brother was raised only in Portuguese until he went to school. And then the teacher thought that he was special, and my parents felt ashamed and then raised me in English. And also the having to teach yourself as an adult after the fact becomes that much more difficult than if you would have learned it as a kid.
For sure.
And wanting to show the effort and initiative, but then feeling ashamed if people say, "Não tens vergonha," because you don't know how to speak fluent Portuguese.
Yeah.
When you go hang out at a family event or you go to Churrasco Portugal on Lawrence, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I always feel good about it. Like I feel like I've put in lots of effort and I've learned some new things, and then I'll go somewhere Portuguese and immediately be like, especially when you're over in Portugal, I'm almost like, well, I can't tell them that I'm Portuguese because they'll be ashamed of me because I'm not as fluent as I should be. But it's so funny that you say that you had a similar experience, because I feel like as like I would be, I guess, a second generation Canadian, and it sounds like you are as well. I feel like there's a lot of people who are in the same boat as us who had similar experiences. So just like we both probably endured multiple years of disappointing outcomes in the Euro and World Cup until very recently, one of the best days of my life when Portugal won the Euro Cup. So
oh man, if you get me going, we're going to be here for 6 hours. I swear to God. I remember you would be, I think, a year older than my brother if you went to Concordia 20. Are you 92?
I'm actually an 89. So
89. Oh, wow. Okay. So you're not way, but like a few years older than. So I'm 96. So actually, when I first started watching soccer and following it, it was for World Cup 2006 in Germany. So I actually did not witness Euro 2004, thankfully. I did not have to go through that traumatizing experience. Yeah. But indeed, my first real expression of heartbreak was when Brazil and Portugal lost to France within a week of each other in 2006.
Yeah, that would be tough.
I despised France in soccer ever since that day. And when they won in Euro 2016, like, it made me cry. And it was just like one of the greatest day of, I would tie it with the Bombers winning the Grey Cup, because obviously like that's literally where I'm from, but there's nothing like the intrinsic feeling and euphoria and the innate love for soccer. Like, yes, we're born in Canada. I mean, I guess my brothers and I, we first generation Canadian because my parents are immigrants, but like, just being able to see that, like, it's so, you can't replicate that. Like,
it's hard to explain.
You can't fake it. Like,
it's hard to explain to people. And especially I find friends who don't have like European heritages or heritage from like a soccer nation, we'll say. It's hard for them to understand, and it's hard to explain it, but it was an awesome day and just a cool experience. I don't know if it's better or worse that my parents are both Portuguese, so I only had one country to grow up rooting for. Maybe if I had, like in your case, Brazil and Portugal, I would have hedged my bets a little bit, and it would have been, I don't know if it's more disappointment or less disappointment, but regardless, that's just a unique part of my heritage that I'm really proud of.
Yeah, man, it's something that's so important to keep close to. And actually, like, when I look at the cities in Canada that have huge Portuguese populations, I've never stopped to think about Montreal. Obviously, Montreal is one of the most populated cities in Canada. Is there a big Portuguese community there that you've seen?
Yeah, very, very big. I mean, it's changed over time and even over my lifetime, but like the Plateau area in Montreal is very much downtown. Used to be like the epicenter of Portuguese community in Quebec. That's changed over time, especially as the years have gone on. People have, families have grown and spread out. But yeah, there's especially like even here in Toronto, there's obviously a huge Portuguese community, and you hear about them all over the country. So there's a lot more of us than we think.
There is, man. It definitely, especially being from Winnipeg, like there's a surprisingly big community when you think about how big the one is in Toronto or even Montreal, and
Yeah.
Vancouver as well is huge. So I'm glad that I at least was able to grow up in a city where there's a mass amount of Portuguese immigrants, because when I moved to Nanaimo to play football for the VI Raiders, or
Yeah.
any friends I've met in Saskatoon or Regina, like, or it's non-existent basically. So to have been in one of the 5 major cities where the community is big is
Yeah.
definitely important for feeling a bit of that cultural sense. Obviously, minus when you
Yeah.
go to Portugal, then it's totally different.
Yeah, yeah. Well, even here, like I'm lucky in Toronto, there's such a big community. So when I'm missing home or my mom's cooking, I can get a taste of that by just ordering or going to one of the many Portuguese restaurants in the neighborhood, or even there's some Portuguese specialty grocery stores that I'm lucky to have not too far from home, that I can go pick up some stuff that reminds me of my childhood and that I just have an affinity for. So
It's great you mentioned that, because you're in Toronto when you can go to Food Basics and you can buy sumal and
yeah,
sardinhas,
exactly.
or you can buy chouriço at No
Yeah.
Frills straight out of Ponta Delgada.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And those are the exact things that I'm talking about. So it's funny.
Well, we'll definitely have to sit down right while you're in the middle of breaking down the numbers and organizing the last of everything you need to do for the combine. When Portugal plays against
Yeah.
Turkey, we'll have to sit down and go
Yeah.
catch the game at a Boteco on
Yeah.
on Queen Street West,
It's
down
going to
in
be
Little
stressful.
Portugal.
It's going to be stressful. The one good thing for people like you and I is that the day after Grey Cup Sunday this year, the World Cup starts in Qatar. So it's like, well, we're going to have 2 straight months of nothing but pure entertainment. The playoffs and Grey Cup should be amazing this year. And then during my off season, I can hopefully enjoy a run for Portugal if they get there.
Well, we got to knock on wood first, and Turkey
Yeah.
is, primero, and then segunda would be Italia. So like,
Yeah.
or it'll be like the most stressful time in the history of Toronto immigrants populations.
Yeah. Yeah, me and my friends might not be on speaking basis after that one, but looking forward to meeting you in person next week at the combine, and hopefully the first of many conversations.
Absolutely, Eric. And we are getting towards the end of our time. So I did want to ask you 3 rapid questions to have a
Sure.
little bit more fun before we part for today.
Sure.
Favorite Portuguese player ever besides Ronaldo?
Oh, beside Ronaldo would have to be there's so many that come to mind. I'm trying to think what my brothers would say. Probably either Pepe or Bruno Alves, central
Really?
defenders. Yeah, they just play like
Wow.
but listen, they play a very physical, mean, aggressive style of defense. And as a football family, there's just a natural synergy there. We love it. We love the attitude. Pepe is obviously one of the best to do it for any country. But yeah, just like their flair.
I mean, I'm not saying that's a bad answer. Like Bruno Alves,
Yeah.
like I was
Yeah.
traumatized in 2012 when he hit the penalty off the right side of the crossbar, but
Yeah.
made up for it when Portugal ended up winning the
Yeah.
Euro 4 years later. And Pepe, oftentimes people have said, "Oh, you look like Pepe because you have a big head and you have curly hair." When he's bald, obviously most of the time.
Yeah.
But
That's funny.
Pepe
That's
is
funny.
probably one of my favorite. I would say he's probably my favorite Portuguese defender of all time.
Yeah. There's a bunch of others though. It's hard to like Nuno Gomes came
Oh
to
yeah.
mind right away because that was like right when I started watching. Figo is a legend. There's so many. We could have a whole separate podcast on that.
Like the whole Euro 2014, like Rui Costa, Deco,
Yeah.
Ricardo. I mean, technically, my first name legally is Ricardo, so he was one of my
There you
favorite
go.
players growing up as a kid because of the shootout against England 2006. Like, oh,
Legend. Gloves off.
what's the best flavor of Sumal?
Passion fruit, hands down.
Oh, there we go. We got some correct answers up in here.
Yeah. I like orange. Not really a fan of the lemon one, but passion fruit, and it's really like the only thing I like that is passion fruit flavored. But that's a go-to for sure for
Yeah.
me.
Maracujá, greater than symbol, laranja, and ananas. I guess in
Yeah.
Portugal, in Brazil, it's abacaxi, but
Yeah.
yeah. And my final question for you is, what is the most memorable sporting event that you've attended as a fan in person?
As a fan, so not including my I mean, it's hard. I would say
with fandom involved. Like if it's through work, then it's like, well, everyone wins because I'm here at this great events.
Yeah, but I mean, the really cool thing about my job in Grey Cup is we work really hard up until the game, but once the the ball gets kicked off, there's nothing else we can do. So we're just watching essentially as fans. So it's hard not to choose a Grey Cup. I would say usually my favorite sporting event is, or my favorite element of a sporting event is always the flyover out of Grey Cup, because it's like a real emotional moment. Like like you've worked so hard all year and there's so much that goes into it. There's ups, there's downs, all that kind of stuff. But it's just like a really good reminder that it's a really cool place to be, and that I've been really lucky. Other than that, I would say during I forget which year it was, I was in Portugal with my family and we went and watched just it was a game against the Czech Republic. I believe it was the Euro in 2012, I want to say.
2012, that was the quarterfinal.
Yeah, so we
won
went
1-0.
Yes, that great memory. I'm impressed. So we were actually in Lisbon and we watched it in like a giant park with like thousands of other Portuguese people. And when they won, it was like absolute chaos. And there's like flares going off, and like my parents were very stressed, I'm sure, because they wanted to get us all out of there. But it was just cool to be like, obviously here being in Canada, I'm celebrating with my family and such, but being over there as part of like the broader collective was really cool, especially like reflecting now in my career. Like we don't really have a vested interest in any one team winning, right? We're happy if the scores are high and there's no controversy, then it's a job well done for us. So still having that, being able to like root for Portugal and in major world championships like that is a lot of fun. And that's a memory that I definitely won't forget.
Are you sure that your parents weren't stressed out because they had to wait 79 minutes for Ronaldo to score the diving header off the corner kick?
I think we were all stressed about that, but then after that, the stress quickly changed to them to getting us all out safely.
That was actually a very stressful game to watch. I remember seeing that at home and just like being on the edge of my seat. And then the second he scored, like going bonkers and just, oh man, like 2012 was so close to what could have been, but it was all made up for it 4 years later. So all's well that ends well.
Yeah, exactly.
Eric, with that, I want to thank you for having been on today's episode. I was super, super excited to talk with you before, and I'm even feeling more excited now after the fact because of confirming that indirect Portuguese inquisitive nature of, are you from my culture? Yes, you are. And then the synergy is off the charts.
Yeah.
So that's it. It was much appreciated that you were able to come on to today's episode and chat.
My pleasure. Appreciate what you do and the support you have for our league. And like I said, I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person, and hopefully we can find somewhere to share a small or maybe a sag and enjoy the games next week.
Absolutely. And thank you to the listener for enjoying today's episode with the Director of Football Operations at the CFL, Eric Noivo.